Okay, let's unpack this. We have a fascinating stack of sources exploring a foundational yet profoundly unsettling truth about desire. It seems the individual who masters the timing, the one who knows how to feed your longing and simultaneously starve your certainty, well, that person holds the invisible reins to your emotional world.
What's fascinating here is that we aren't exploring love as just this spontaneous, natural thing. Not really. We are diving into a paradox where power operates through calculated withdrawal.
Withdrawal, right.
Yeah, the source material argues that true, lasting seduction isn't about the act of giving, it's about the deliberate art of subtraction.
Right.
It's about becoming the architect of a very specific psychological state.
And that psychological state, that's where the power resides, isn't it? That ache you feel when attention fades, when a carefully timed message goes unanswered, or maybe when commitment is deliberately kept just out of reach. That feeling? Our sources argue that's not necessarily rejection. Psychologically, it's the deliberate wielding of control. It's making the target confused, maybe a bit needy, and ultimately completely fixated.
Indeed. And the core hook here, pulled right from the historical analysis we're looking at, is this question. Have you ever wanted someone so deeply that their silence felt louder, more significant than their words?
Yeah.
That kind of craving, the analysis suggests, is born from a vacuum, this desire for what we can't fully grasp or, depend upon. We're really diving into the process of emotional management, where the uncertainty itself becomes the thing you desire.
That sets the mission for this deep dive perfectly, then. We're not just recounting a historical narrative, we're analyzing a strategic case study, essentially. We need to look deeply at the history of Alara Voss and Captain Adrian Lentz. It's this complex, decades-long dynamic set against the backdrop of, 1810 Vienna.
That's right, 1810 Vienna.
And our goal is to extract and analyze the precise psychological mechanics behind using absence and anticipation as tools for, ultimate emotional control.
And this investigation begins necessarily with the architect herself, Alara Voss. The sources describe her moving through Viennese society like a myth. It's quite evocative.
Like a myth. I like that.
Yeah. She gained independence and, importantly, financial security after surviving a loveless but advantageous marriage to a wealthy baron. That gave her a rare social freedom for the time. But her power, the source's stress, was derived less from her circumstances and more from her meticulous self-control.
So she seems to have internalized this lesson that vulnerability is the enemy of power, perhaps.
You could say that. The sources emphasize that her strength was her composure, this untouchable, seemingly self-sufficient demeanor. While her contemporaries might have relied on, outward flattery or maybe dramatic emotional displays, Alara operated with almost surgical precision.
Surgical? How so?
Yes, the source notes are quite specific on this. They say she smiles not primarily to please, but to provoke a reaction, maybe an internal question in the admirer's mind, like, what does that smile really mean?
Planting a seed of doubt.
Exactly. She was apparently hyper-aware of her own conversational output, ensuring every soft word seemed to imply more than it said. Her laughter might draw a man closer, tempting him with access, but it was her carefully deployed silence, her strategic silence, that could, in the source's rather dramatic phrasing, break a man.
Wow.
She was practicing emotional asymmetry right from the start. She gave less, consciously, and received exponentially more attention, more focus because of it.
It sets the stage for a dramatic conflict rooted entirely in internal psychology, then. So this deep dive is about tracing those invisible threads of seduction and showing how they're pulled. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because you need to understand the stage, right? The historical and psychological stage of 1810 Vienna.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Alara, the untouchable myth, self-contained and operating with what seems like a clear psychological agenda. Now we introduce the target, Captain Adrian Lentz. Tell us about him.
Right. Captain Lentz. He's a decorated military hero, just returned from the Napoleonic Wars. Successful, proud, probably in his early 30s. He represents, the peak of external achievement for that era.
Got it. The successful soldier.
But, and this is crucial, the sources stressed that conventional success had become stale for him. He'd conquered armies, achieved material victory, but found himself restless, maybe even a bit hollowed out by certainty.
Bored by certainty. Okay, that's key.
Absolutely crucial. Alara didn't seek out a traditionally vulnerable target like someone weak or easily manipulated. No, she sought a man bored by predictability. He was looking for a challenge his usual tools, his sword, his rank, his money couldn't solve. Something different.
That rings so true, doesn't it? We often think of victims of manipulation as being somehow weak, but here it's the opposite. Adrian was tired of the easy win.
Exactly. He was longing for complexity, maybe a depth of feeling he hadn't found on the battlefield, and the warnings he apparently received about Alara, that she was a heartbreaker, that she played games, they didn't deter him at all.
They drew him in.
They acted as a kind of perverse invitation, like, here's a challenge actually worth failing for.
Okay, so the stage is set, the meeting, a grand masquerade, right?
The perfect setting. Ambiguity right from the start. Alara's noted to be wearing silver, her mask only partly concealing her face. It invites you closer, but keeps that distance.
And the first interaction, the dialogue, it sets the rules immediately.
It does. Alara initiates, which is interesting in itself, but her line isn't typical flirtation. It's calculated observation. She says, "You look like a man who's used to being admired."
Not, you look handsome, but you look used to being admired. It's a challenge.
Precisely. She's immediately challenging his status, not praising his appearance. It's like saying, I see the pedestal you stand on, but I'm not putting you there. It puts Adrian on the defensive, forces him to engage with wit, not just expectation.
And he rises to it.
He does. He seems to recognize the game, maybe instinctively, or maybe he's just provoked. He replies, "And you look like a woman who refuses to be admired."
Turning it back on her. Acknowledging her strategy, almost.
Exactly. He indicates he understands her value lies in that inaccessibility. And the source notes that this reply secured her attention far more than any, gushing declaration of passion ever could. She smiled.
But not a normal smile.
Not with pleasure or anticipation of conquest, apparently. More like intrigue. That initial interaction caught Adrian not through some overwhelming physical passion, but through intellectual curiosity. He was hooked because he needed to solve the riddle of her refusal. Hashtag tag 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 1.2, the principle of oscillation.
That curiosity, that's the hook she uses to apply her foundational strategy. The principle of oscillation. Okay, this sounds like the core mechanic. We need to really get into this.
It really is the engine of this whole dynamic. It's the strategic management of proximity and distance, appearing, then vanishing. Alara operated from this fundamental understanding, or maybe intuition, that desire, especially the kind that morphs into obsession, actually dies in satisfaction.
Dies in satisfaction. So the moment you give yourself completely...
You lose the mystery, that essential element. Familiarity, in this specific context of seduction, breeds a kind of emotional fatigue. You become predictable.
So it's a dance. Warming up, then cooling down, appearing, vanishing. The target must never be able to predict the next move.
That's the key. If they can predict warmth, they relax, the tension drops. If they can predict coldness reliably, well, they might just walk away, right? Get discouraged.
It's the randomness, the unpredictability that keeps them engaged.
Precisely. Let's trace the immediate sequence after that masquerade. Adrian calls on her, still buzzing from that curious connection. This is the warmth phase.
Okay, she lets him in.
Oh, she receives him beautifully. Her salon is described as perfumed, her manner gracious, her eyes luminous, focused entirely on him. He leaves completely intoxicated. He's been given this powerful shot of emotional investment, of hope.
A strong hit of dopamine, right? A clear sense of, okay, this is going somewhere.
Absolutely. But then, the source emphasizes the immediate, almost clinical withdrawal. The very next week, Adrian, likely expecting that same easy access, calls again.
And
she's gone. No explanation. Maybe she's out riding, maybe visiting someone. The reason doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact of her absence and the lack of explanation.
The unexplained absence. That's crucial.
It's essential. This isn't about setting healthy boundaries. It's about establishing uncertainty as the normal operating state of the relationship. And the source stresses the impact this has on the decorated captain. He waits for 3 days, pacing.
Wow. The man used to commanding armies
Is now entirely paralyzed by the non-presence of one woman. He's forced onto her timeline, not his.
And his mind must be racing. What did I do wrong? Did I offend her?
Exactly. And because there's no answer, his mind is forced to generate possibilities. And crucially, all of those possibilities, all that mental energy he's expending, serves her purpose by keeping her firmly at the center of his thoughts. Hashtag tag, tag 1.3, the power of the frayed note.
Okay.
But, perpetual absence, total silence.
Yeah.
Eventually, that just cools the blood. If she stayed gone indefinitely, his fixation might just curdle into frustration, maybe even indifference.
Right, you can't maintain obsession on nothing.
No. Alara needed to administer the next small, calculated dose of hope. And the timing had to be precise. Just when his confusion was peaking, maybe when his hope was starting to turn a little sour.
Which brings us to the evening of the 4th day, the arrival of the note, the famous frayed note. I think this is where the strategy really crystallizes, doesn't it? this tiny object carrying so much psychological weight?
It's brutally minimal, yet intensely effective. The source gives us the exact contents, just. Vienna's beautiful tonight. I thought of you as the rain fell.
That's it. 16 words. No apology, no explanation for being gone 3 days, no invitation to meet.
Nothing. That's the genius of it. Let's break down why it's so potent.
Okay.
First, it functions as a psychological lifeline. It prevents that kill switch of outright rejection from being flipped. By saying she thought of him, she confirms he still exists in her world. That relieves the immediate, crushing fear of total rejection.
So it answers the basic question, does she still think of me at all? Yes. Okay.
Second, the use of vivid sensory detail, Vienna, the falling rain, implies a kind of intimacy, maybe solitude. It suggests a moment of authentic, private reflection where he popped into her mind. This makes the target feel special, selected, privy to a private thought.
It creates this fleeting image of her alone, thinking of him, which is the direct opposite of the cold reality of her unexplained absence.
Exactly. But the third, and probably most crucial function, is the deliberate maintenance of the vacuum. It provides zero explanation for her 3-day silence, and it offers absolutely no commitment for future contact. It's a moment of pure, unattached warmth, a gesture without obligation.
So it forces him to bridge the gap, to supply the narrative between those few words and her recent actions.
Precisely. He gets the dopamine hit from the attention, the warmth, but the cortisol spike from the underlying uncertainty remains totally unresolved. His brain has to work overtime to square that circle, to resolve the cognitive dissonance.
And because he's already invested, he supplies the flattering fantasy, right? She was testing him, she was overwhelmed by her feelings, she missed him.
Correct. The ambiguity is the real weapon here. She provides the spark, he provides the fuel, by obsessing over the meaning.
And the source gives this incredible detail about his physical reaction. He reread that note so many times over the next few days that the paper literally frayed at the edges.
That detail is the defining metaphor, isn't it? The note stopped being just communication. It became an object of fixation. It occupied his mind entirely, replacing the complex, maybe flawed reality of Alara the person with the endless, idealized possibility she represented. The note was his fragile link to hope.
And that's the moment, the key shift. The hunter became the hunted. Adrian wasn't consciously pursuing Alara anymore. He was pursuing the feeling that note gave him, that possibility of relief from the anxiety she had so skillfully induced. Okay, so we've established the strategy is this oscillation, this push and pull. But the sources argue something quite radical, that seduction truly begins not with attraction, not with the warmth, but with absence. That feels backward.
It is a profound reframing, isn't it? Most of us believe we're seduced by what's present, someone's charm, their looks, their intelligence. But Alara, or at least the strategy attributed to her, understood that attention itself can be cheap. Real seduction, the kind that lasts and deepens, requires leveraging the psychological vacuum created by deliberate withdrawal.
So her genius was making her absence more emotionally resonant, more significant than her presence.
Exactly. Which brings us back to this idea of the imagination vacuum. When she was physically gone, Captain Lenz's mind was compelled to fill that silence. But human psychology, especially when we're craving validation or connection, is biased, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't fill the space with logic.
No, we fill it with flattering, often self-justifying fantasies. His mind generated endless narratives. She must be struggling with her feelings for me. She's just too refined for this easy pursuit. She's testing my depth, my commitment.
And these fantasies didn't just sustain his interest, they magnified it.
Hugely, as the sources state quite chillingly. Nothing enslaves the human mind more effectively than the hope of relief that never comes. That state of perpetual limbo, the anxiety of the unknown coupled with just enough hope of rescue, that's the true emotional hook.
So if Alara's presence is the reward, her absence is the machine that makes Adrian work for it. He's running scenarios, justifying her actions. He's essentially seducing himself on her behalf while she's gone.
You've nailed it. And Alara was meticulous in applying what the sources call the breadcrumb strategy. She understood the system needed small, necessary inputs to maintain its energy. You can't run on pure absence forever.
Right. The frayed note was one breadcrumb. What else?
She gave just enough warmth, intermittently, to keep his faith alive. Maybe a single fleeting glance across a crowded ballroom that seemed to hold extra meaning. Or an accidental, maybe slightly prolonged brush of hands in a doorway.
Oh, those accidents.
Exactly. Or perhaps a half-finished, intriguing sentence dropped in conversation that practically compelled his imagination to complete it, usually in the most favorable way possible for her.
Every silence became gasoline for his obsession. The moments of contact were just sparks, but the gaps in between, the silences, that's where his longing truly caught fire.
And those silences forced him into these internal, agonizing wrestling matches with his own emotions. He was fighting his fear of rejection, his confusion, all in isolation, which of course just magnified the longing, the need for her. She ensured he chased her not just for her affection, but for relief from the crushing uncertainty she had so expertly manufactured. Hashtag 2.2, confusing chaos for love.
And the narrative confirms this descent into, well, obsession. The sources detail Adrian's spiral. He started neglecting military duties, apparently suffered sleepless nights, the frantic pacing we mentioned, even riding past her villa late at night, driven by this raw, almost pathological need for resolution, clarity, relief, something. And this is where we absolutely must make that critical distinction separating this kind of strategy from genuine romance. The key analysis from the source material is that Adrian didn't truly love Ilara, the person. He loved the tension she created inside him.
Wow, he loved the tension. He confused that intense emotional volatility, that feeling of being constantly on edge, the highs and lows, with genuine passionate depth.
But wait a minute, if he's only loving the tension, does the source material ever touch on the morality of this? Or is it just analyzing effective cruelty? It sounds incredibly harsh to say he wasn't in love. That feels like splitting hairs when someone is clearly suffering.
That's a fair question. The sources we're looking at in their analysis tend to remain pretty impartial. They focus more on the effectiveness of the psychological mechanics rather than making strong moral judgments. However, they do draw a clear psychological line.
Okay, what's the line?
Healthy love, they note, generally provides a foundation of peace and security. You might have challenges, sure, but overall it fosters growth and stability. Obsession, by contrast, feeds on anxiety and fear. It leads to fixation, dependency, and often a diminishment of the self.
So Ilara, the coquette, operates entirely in the realm of anxiety.
Entirely. By being perpetually elusive, she dramatically increased the perceived value of her affection. It felt rare, precious, intensely hard-won, precisely because it was so inconsistent and difficult to obtain.
So the high value he placed on her attention was a direct result of how hard she made him work for it, psychologically.
Precisely. And we see this played out perfectly in what the sources call the fever of anticipation scene. This is the famous candlelit dinner hosted by some countess. Ilara arrives, dressed in a gown described as the color of moonlight, immediately commanding the atmosphere.
And Adrian's already there, probably trying to look like he doesn't care.
Exactly. Trying to project nonchalance, maybe talking loudly with another woman, probably desperately trying to draw Ilara's gaze.
But she's the master of controlled, minimal interaction.
Completely. She walked past him, maybe without a word initially. She spreads her attention thinly among other guests, laughing softly here, engaging fully there with everyone but him. She makes herself visually present, yet emotionally inaccessible. He's right there, but she forces him into this state of competitive striving for even the slightest acknowledgement.
God, that sounds exhausting.
And then the surgical strike. Just when his tension is probably at its peak, Adrian catches her eye across the crowded room. She returns his gaze, and she holds it for what the source calls 3 seconds too long.
3 seconds, that's it.
That sustained gaze, just 3 seconds, is the expertly timed reward in the intermittent cycle. That brief moment is apparently enough to make the room blur around him. The music, the chatter, the other people, they just disappear. His world instantly collapses into her silence and that fleeting moment of potential connection.
But the strategy demands she can't let that linger.
Immediately reinstated. The moment that tension peaked, she pulled back. She left the dinner early. No big fuss, no dramatic excuses, just gone. Leaving behind only, apparently, the lingering scent of jasmine. And, more importantly, the psychological weapon that defines her power, the lingering unanswerable question.
Which is?
Did she look at me that way because she genuinely desired me? Or because she knew I would notice it, obsess over it, and be driven mad by it?
That uncertainty is the gasoline. Certainty kills imagination, leads to stable satisfaction, maybe even boredom in this context. Uncertainty feeds boundless imagination and leads to frantic, self-generating passion.
Exactly. By leaving him to wonder, she forced his passion, his obsession, to grow beyond all reason. She's actually made him responsible for seducing himself in her absence, fueled by that one ambiguous look.
This analysis is taking us way past just, historical anecdote. We're getting into some hard psychological concepts here. The source seems to argue that what Ilara practiced wasn't just accidental cruelty, but refined psychology. It was rooted in understanding fundamental human needs, or maybe exploiting them. Let's really transition into her strategy now, starting with the impact of her self-possession, hashtag 3.1, the mirror of narcissism, self-sufficiency.
Right. Alara's constant serene demeanor wasn't just a personality trait. It was her key operational tool.
Mhm.
The sources argue that seduction, at least in this manipulative framework, is fundamentally not about who you are as a person deep down. It's about what others perceive you to be.
Okay.
And her self-sufficiency, her apparent lack of need for anyone or anything, made her incredibly magnetic. Think about it. She seemed to have conquered the need for external validation, something most people constantly battle with, consciously or not.
So she projects this aura of completeness, and the target, Adrian in this case, who is likely struggling with his own sense of lack or restlessness.
Is immediately drawn to that perceived wholeness, like a moth to a flame.
Why is that specific kind of self-content so attractive, though?
Well, the sources bring in some historical observations, specifically referencing Sigmund Freud's insights on narcissistic personalities. Now, narcissism here isn't necessarily the clinical disorder we talk about today, but more about profound self-contentment.
Okay.
Freud suggested that individuals who exhibit this kind of deep self-contentment, particularly, though not exclusively, women in his writings, possess an unusual psychological pull.
Why? What's the pull?
Freud posited that this serene narcissism unconsciously reminds the observer of the completeness they supposedly felt in early childhood. That time of innocent self-sufficiency, before we realize we need others for validation, for sustenance, for emotional stability.
Like a lost Eden of the self.
Sort of. So when we encounter someone like Alara, who appears whole and self-contained, it triggers a deep-seated feeling of incompleteness in us, the observers. We're drawn to them almost desperately, as a means of trying to regain that lost sense of unity, maybe by possessing them or earning their regard.
That is a critical insight. So Adrian wasn't just chasing a woman he found beautiful or intriguing. He was chasing validation, maybe even chasing a psychological return to that pre-needy state.
It's argued he was driven to earn the attention of someone who clearly didn't need him. And in doing so, he wasn't really seeking her love, not primarily. He was seeking the reflection of a powerful, validated version of himself in her cool, beautiful, seemingly indifferent eyes.
She functioned as a high-stakes mirror. Winning her affection felt like conquering the ultimate internal challenge, proving he was worthy of someone who was inherently, magnificently sufficient unto herself.
Exactly. It wasn't about her, it was about what possessing her attention said about him. Hashtag 3.2, the addiction of uncertainty, intermittent reinforcement.
Okay, so this internal striving, this desperate need to prove one's worth to the self-sufficient object, it's perfectly fueled by that blend of hope and fear we keep coming back to. Desire, when wielded strategically like this, requires two ingredients: the hope you might be loved and the pervasive fear you might be forgotten. Alara mastered the rhythm between these two.
She absolutely did. The careful scheduling of warmth, the touch, the glance, the note followed by immediate unpredictable silence. This moves the dynamic past simple infatuation. It pushes it into the territory of neurological addiction.
Right. This is where we need to get technical, really dive deep. What exactly is intermittent reinforcement from a psychological perspective, and how does it apply so ruthlessly to human emotions?
Okay, intermittent reinforcement in behavioral psychology basically refers to rewards or punishments or any kind of stimulus delivered on an unpredictable schedule. Not every time, not never, but sometimes, maybe. And it's widely recognized as the most effective known method for generating persistent, often quite pathological behavior.
More effective than rewarding every time.
Much more effective for persistence. If you reward a behavior every single time that's a fixed schedule, the behavior becomes dependable, sure, but the thrill fades quickly. You kind of get used to it, develop resilience to the stimulus. But if the reward is delivered randomly, that's a variable ratio schedule, the anticipation becomes intensely addictive.
Okay, the classic example is the slot machine, right? You don't know when the jackpot is coming, so you keep pulling the lever, often faster, more desperately than if you knew exactly when you'd win.
Precisely that mechanism. But now apply it back to Captain Lenz. His lever pull is his persistent attention, his attempts at contact, his pacing, his sleepless nights, rereading the note. Alara's jackpot is minuscule. That fleeting glance, the ambiguous note, the brief moment of warmth.
Because he can't predict when the relief, the reward will arrive, his brain enters the state of high alert, constant anticipation.
Yes. He's not being rewarded for successfully interacting with her in a healthy way. He's being rewarded neurologically for his persistence in the face of crushing uncertainty, That unpredictability hooks the brain far more profoundly than consistent reward ever could.
So the psychological conclusion the source draws is painful.
Yeah.
What feels like intense, passionate, maybe meant to be love is often just a highly effective emotional addiction cycle.
That's the argument. Adrian wasn't experiencing the peace of connection. He was addicted to the roller coaster of anxiety and relief that Alara meticulously created and controlled. Every minimal gesture from her, because it came after a period of withdrawal and anxiety, felt like a breath of pure oxygen after deliberate suffocation. It made him profoundly pathologically dependent.
And the power of this variable schedule, it makes the target incredibly resistant to extinction, doesn't it? Like giving up.
Massively resistant. If she had simply rejected him outright, clearly and finally, he likely would have grieved, healed, and eventually moved on. But by keeping the possibility alive, even if it's only perceived as a tiny chance, he remains permanently tethered to the pursuit.
His brain is actively seeking to complete the pattern, resolve the uncertainty.
Exactly. And because the reward is so rare, the moment it does appear, the moment she holds his gaze for those 3 seconds, it's registered by his brain as disproportionately valuable, hugely significant. It's a trick of perceived scarcity, but applied directly to human emotion and attention. #Shagtag 3.3, the anatomy of emotional enslavement.
Let's break down the physical chemistry here. It sounds almost clinical. Alara is manipulating the very survival mechanisms of Adrian's brain. Let's trace the chemical flow of this fear cycle you mentioned.
That's a good way to put it, the fear cycle. When Alara withdrew her attention or presence after providing some affection, she triggered Adrian's innate primal fear of abandonment. This fear is deeply hardwired into our biology for survival reasons.
Right, we need connection.
We do. And that fear immediately causes the release of large amounts of cortisol, the primary stress hormone. So the captain is quite literally under physiological stress. His body is in a state of alarm, and his brain desperately craves resolution to restore equilibrium, to feel safe again.
And the only source of that resolution, that safety, is her, Alara.
In his perception, yes. She holds the key to turning off the cortisol drip. So the subsequent moment of reconnection, even if it's just the briefest confirmation of his existence a note, the glance, it floods his brain with dopamine, that powerful reward chemical.
Ah, the relief.
The relief and the feeling of intense relief and reward following intense prolonged anxiety is vastly more potent, neurologically speaking, than a reward that occurs without that precursor stress. It feels amazing.
So he unconsciously associates her with both the pain of the stress and the immense pleasure of the relief. The cycle itself becomes the identity of the relationship.
Absolutely. And the result of this rapid, often self-administered cycle, this neurological roller coaster, is insidious. It changes how the target thinks.
How so?
First, as we said, the target learns to value even the smallest, most non-committal gestures disproportionately. A breadcrumb feels like a feast. They become incredibly grateful for scraps of attention.
Okay.
Second, and this is arguably more destructive, the target often entirely stops engaging in healthy self-assessment. They cease asking fundamental questions like, do I actually like this person? Is this connection good for me? Is that making me happy overall?
Instead, their entire mental energy shifts. Where?
It shifts to a question of emotional survival, focused entirely outward. Do they still like me? Have I succeeded today in earning their approval? What do I need to do to get the next hit of warmth?
That's the moment emotional enslavement solidifies then. Their identity, their sense of internal worth and stability becomes completely wrapped up in earning the coquette's unpredictable approval.
Completely. The dynamic shifts entirely to the coquette's timeline, her rules or emotional needs. She becomes the invisible master, dictating the target's internal chemical states simply by choosing when to reply, when to appear, and when to remain silent and absent.
I have to ask, I'm just stepping back for our listeners, if we're analyzing this purely as a strategy, does the source material offer any, I don't know, practical advice? How could someone listening right now distinguish between genuine, passionate commitment that might have ups and downs and this kind of anxiety-fueled addiction cycle? It must be incredibly difficult to tell the difference when you're inside it.
That's the critical application, isn't it?
Yep.
Making this knowledge useful. The sources suggest focusing on the aftermath of interactions, the overall feeling the relationship leaves you with consistently.
Okay, like what?
If the relationship consistently leaves you feeling exhausted, drained, constantly questioning your own value, hypervigilant for signs of withdrawal or disapproval. If you feel a pervasive lack of internal peace, even when things are supposedly good, you are likely operating within an intermittent reinforcement cycle versus genuine connection. which, while it absolutely involves challenges and disagreements, should ultimately leave a net feeling of security, mutual respect, and enhanced self-worth over time. Obsession, by contrast, leaves you feeling chronically empty, always chasing the next hit of relief, the next validation.
So the simple test might be, do I feel fundamentally whole and okay when I'm alone, or do I only feel okay, only feel real when I have their attention and approval?
That's a very good way to frame it. The coquette's strategy hinges on subtly undermining your sense of self-sufficiency, making you feel dependent on their validation for your equilibrium.
Okay, so after months, maybe longer, of this refined emotional dance, this intense push and pull, the pressure cooker inevitably has to reach some kind of crisis point, right? It can't go on forever. The source material brings us to a dramatic climax, the confrontation on the old bridge. Hashtag tag tag 4.1, the confrontation on the old bridge.
Yes, the setting itself, as described in the sources, is significant. It mirrors the emotional landscape. A desolate winter night, snow falling quietly, maybe muffling sound, under isolated lanterns on an old bridge. This physical stillness provides a stark contrast to the internal chaos raging inside Captain Lentz.
He finally confronts her.
He does. He finally corners Alara, his usual military composure completely shattered. The source describes his voice as breaking between anger and pleading. It's a moment of raw desperation.
And his question is direct.
Simple, stripped of all pride. Why do you play with me? What is it you want from me?
And her response? Is it emotional? Does she break character?
Not at all. Her response is the ultimate deflection. It recenters the power dynamic immediately by turning the focus back onto his inherent needs and actions. She looks at him calmly, apparently completely unruffled by his distress, and says something like, "Play with you. I gave you nothing you didn't ask for."
Wow. Blaming the victim, essentially.
And the critical, paralyzing observation that seals it. And yet, she points out, here you are, still waiting.
Oof. That is absolutely brutal, but psychologically incredibly effective in transferring the blame, isn't it? By saying, I gave you nothing you didn't ask for, she implies that he engineered the whole situation through his own relentless pursuit, his own need for this exact kind of complex, painful dynamic.
It forces what the analysis calls the mirror moment. In that instant, Adrian stops seeing her primarily as this mysterious external force of nature, this goddess or demon acting upon him. He sees her, perhaps for the first time clearly, as a flawless mirror.
Reflecting what?
Reflecting his own desperate, profound needs and weaknesses right back at him. His hunger for validation, his boredom with certainty, his need for an unconquerable challenge. These were the true architects of his fixation, not necessarily her inherent qualities.
So the revelation is, the seduction was never really about her power over him. It was about his own profound need being exposed. His fundamental lack of self-sufficiency made him vulnerable to this particular game.
That's the insight he reaches. Seduction, in this specific context, was about his own internal weakness being laid bare, not just her manipulation.
And does she offer any comfort, any explanation?
No. She delivers the lesson clinically, coolly. She apparently leaves him standing there, alone in the falling snow, without giving him the satisfaction of tears or dramatic goodbye, or even a clear rejection. Understanding her strategy was his first, incredibly painful step toward potential freedom, but the emotional price, the months of torment, had already been paid in full. Hashtag 4.2, the breaking point and departure.
But that clarity he supposedly found on the bridge, it wasn't enough to immediately break the addiction cycle, was it? The pull was too strong.
Apparently not immediately. The true breaking point, according to the narrative, comes later, triggered by the imminent threat of permanent, irrecoverable loss. The summer rumor.
What was the rumor?
Word spreads through Vienna that Alara is leaving, possibly for good. Rumored to be heading for Italy with a fashionable young sculptor, a man who represents art, passion, maybe freedom. A stark contrast to Adrian's rigid military discipline and controlled world.
Ah, the fear of final loss. That forces his hand.
It forces the final desperate action. Adrian, violating all social protocol, maybe even his own sense of dignity, arrives uninvited at her villa. He finds her in the garden, trimming roses, and there he offers the full, vulnerable confession stripped of all remaining pride. I love you.
And Alara, how does she respond to this raw declaration?
In a rare moment of what seems like direct verbal truth, she provides the final, surgical analysis of their entire dynamic. You love the idea of me, she says quietly, perhaps still holding the pruning shears, but you've never seen me. You've seen only what I reflect back at you.
That's devastatingly honest.
And when he apparently begs her, let me see you then, let me understand the woman behind the mask, she delivers the coquette's ultimate truth, the strategy distilled to its core essence. If you saw me, she tells him, you would stop loving me.
Implying that her actual self beneath the performance is maybe mundane or damaged or just incapable of the kind of connection he fantasizes about, something that would shatter the illusion he's built.
Absolutely. Her power relied entirely on that constructed mystery, that distance. To be truly known is to lose power in this specific game. Vulnerability was the single threat that could dismantle the entire edifice she had so carefully constructed around herself. She couldn't afford to be genuinely seen because genuine connection negates the distance required for that intense, anxiety-fueled desire. Her authentic self had remained hidden behind the armor of her composure.
And then we get this incredibly visceral, almost symbolic moment from the source material. As she delivers this final truth, she accidentally, or perhaps deliberately, cuts a rose, drawing a thin line of blood on her own finger.
Yes. And then she delivers the final, chilling, almost romanticized summary of the entire experience. That's what love feels like, Captain Beauty, and pain intertwined.
Good grief. It's the final trauma, isn't it? Ensuring that even when he eventually withdraws, he'll remain haunted by the supposed beauty and the inherent difficulty of the chase she represented.
It seems so. And Adrian's legacy after this, it became one of flight. He returned to the war, the sources suggest, not primarily out of renewed patriotic duty, but more to escape the psychological memory, the chaos she represented in Vienna, to find oblivion on the battlefield.
And the sources mention one final note from her.
Yes, apparently he carried her final note, described as brief and merciless, until the ink itself faded into the fabric of his coat over the years.
What did it say?
The content is a powerful, almost philosophical warning that transcends their specific relationship. We are what we chase. Be careful what you desire.
Implying that the pursuit itself defines the pursuer, and that he had defined himself for years by chasing something that was, by its very design, completely unattainable. Hashtag tag tag 4.3, the hidden curse of the coquette. We've spent so much time analyzing Ilara's absolute control, her strategic brilliance, maybe even her cruelty. But now we have to pivot, don't we? We need to look at the cost of that power for her. The sources make a strong case that she was, in a way, as much a victim of her own strategy as Adrian was.
This is the critical ethical counterpoint, isn't it? The moral paradox at the heart of this kind of power. Ilara achieved a remarkable degree of psychological dominance, yes, but she paid an incalculable personal price for it. She could likely never fully surrender to love or experience authentic, unguarded connection herself.
Because to maintain the necessary distance, the very thing that made her seem so irresistible, she had to constantly guard her own vulnerability like a fortress wall. She knew or believed that the moment she lowered the drawbridge, the moment she showed need or weakness, she would lose the very magnetism that defined her existence and perhaps her safety.
Exactly. This deliberate, lifelong separation ensured she might be perpetually surrounded by desperate admirers, maybe even feared or respected, yet ultimately remain entirely consumed by a profound solitude.
So the curse of the coquette is that her strategy gives the illusion of connection. It mimics the intensity of deep feeling, but it actively feeds on separation and emotional distance. She had to constantly withhold herself to generate craving in others.
And the source reminds us of the profound irony. What you consistently withhold from others, you ultimately deny yourself. You can't give what you're constantly guarding.
Which makes that journal entry, reportedly discovered late in her life, absolutely devastating. It's her final self-assessment, isn't it? Pulled right from the source material.
Yes, it reads, "They loved me for the mystery I created. Yet in giving them that mystery, I took it from myself. I became the mask they adored."
Wow. She became enslaved by the performance. Trapped inside the persona she had so meticulously constructed over decades, the mask of cool self-sufficiency became a permanent fixture, preventing her from ever allowing someone close enough to know the real, perhaps vulnerable, Ilara Voss.
Her power, therefore, was founded on a great, permanent hollowness, a void where genuine intimacy might have been.
It sounds like she made a trade-off. Exchanged the possibility of genuine intimacy, which is always risky, for the guarantee of perpetual admiration and control, which felt safer. A trade-off many people, maybe even today, choose subconsciously.
It certainly seems like the tragedy of confusing influence with connection. She sought control, and in gaining absolute control over others' emotions, she seems to have forfeited control over her own ability to truly connect, to love, and be loved in return. Hashtag 4.4, the final encounter, years later.
And the narrative provides one last scene, a quiet, reflective coda to their decades-long dance. Years later, Adrian returns to Vienna. He's older, quieter now. He's survived the wars. perhaps finally managed to distance himself somewhat from the chaos of her memory. And he finds Alara.
Yes, he finds her ill and alone in her villa. The scene is deliberately stripped of all the former glamour and intrigue. She's described as simply sitting by the window, aged, vulnerable, a stark contrast to the powerful myth of her youth.
And his arrival, does it still hold weight?
It seems so. Her first words, reportedly soft, are simply, "You came." It acknowledges the enduring legacy of her power over his thoughts, even after all those years apart. His reply confirms his continuous, if perhaps now internalized, pursuit. "I never stopped thinking of you," or words to that effect.
And her response to that continued obsession, even now.
She's the strategist, maybe just by habit, to the very end. She apparently affirms the core law of their dynamic, and that is why I had to keep walking away. Or something similar. She acknowledges that his continuous pursuit, his need, demanded her continuous strategic withdrawal to maintain the dynamic he seemed to crave.
And does he finally get an answer? Does he ask the question?
He does. Finally, gently, he asks the question that must have plagued him for decades, the question seeking closure. "Did you ever love me?"
And her final truth.
Whispered, reportedly devoid of any performance or strategic intention, just weary honesty, perhaps. "I loved the way you looked at me. That was enough."
Whoa, wow, that was enough.
This is her ultimate confession, perhaps. A confession of her own kind of narcissism. Not necessarily cruel, but profoundly self-protective. She loved the reflection of herself in his eyes. Desirable, powerful, worth chasing, worth the obsession. She loved the validated self that his relentless pursuit offered her. She didn't love him, perhaps couldn't. She loved the feeling his attention gave her.
And that, finally, is the moment of complete understanding for Adrian.
It seems to be. He realizes finally and completely that he had never truly been chasing her, Alara Voss, the complex woman. He had been chasing the powerful, validated, compelling version of himself that was reflected in her cool, unattainable calm. Her power over him ended instantly, irrevocably, the moment he fully understood its mechanics. The mask was off, the mystery solved, and the lifelong pursuit evaporated into quiet self-knowledge. #tag outro.
So after all that, what does this entire layered narrative of Alara and Adrian mean for you, listening right now? It's clearly much more than just a historical anecdote about some captivating, manipulative figure from the past. It feels like a critical mirror, doesn't it? A mirror for anyone who might confuse intense attention with genuine affection or mistake that kind of chaotic emotional intensity for lasting intimacy.
It really does.
It illustrates how many people, often unknowingly or maybe subconsciously, use subtle manipulations. The strategic delay in replying to a text, the vague compliment, the intermittent silence, the hot and cold behavior, to maintain a disproportionate level of emotional control in relationships.
And it connects directly back to those core psychological laws we analyzed, what we might even call the law of emotional gravity. The greater the strategic resistance shown by one person, the stronger the obsessive psychological pull felt by the other. Alara's entire art, her power, was resistance. The constant defiance of commitment, the delayed satisfaction, the subtle reversal of the chase dynamic. That mastery of resistance is precisely what made her so potent and ultimately so unforgettable to Adrian.
Which brings us to the necessary moral warning that seems embedded within these sources, doesn't it? While this strategy of absence and oscillation is undeniably effective for short-term seduction and maintaining control, true, healthy power in a relationship, the kind that lasts and builds something real, well, it doesn't come from making someone constantly chase you or proving your value by making them beg for scraps of attention.
No. The argument would be that true connection power lies in making someone feel safe enough to trust you, safe enough to be vulnerable with you, and ultimately safe enough to choose to stay without coercion or manipulation.
But here lies the challenge, the paradox of human psychology that this story highlights so well. Safety rarely excites the mind in the same visceral way that uncertainty does. The calm of commitment, of predictability, often seems dull when compared to the intoxicating thrill of the chase, the drama of the unknown.
It's true. Many of us, perhaps even when offered genuine, dependable peace and affection, might still subconsciously choose the addictive storm of anxiety and relief, because we tragically confuse that physiological roller coaster, the release of cortisol, followed by the dopamine hit, with genuine passion, deep connection, or even destiny.
That distinction feels absolutely vital to make in your own life. When you feel that intense, frantic need for connection with someone, ask yourself, are you chasing a person you genuinely connect with and admire? Or are you chasing the emotional tension and subsequent relief they create in you? Are you addicted to them or addicted to the feeling of finally being noticed after being ignored?
And perhaps let's conclude with the ultimate provocative thought. The final warning gleaned from the deeper analysis of these sources aimed squarely at anyone tempted to wield this kind of power. If you choose to master the art of delayed desire, if you decide to wield absence like a weapon, beware of the ultimate, irreversible cost. The one who waits and pursues isn't always the only one suffering in this dynamic. Sometimes the one who strategically makes others wait is just as enslaved by the very power they're too terrified to ever surrender. Because to stay powerful in that way, they must remain perpetually separate, forever trapped within the cold, self-sufficient mask they created, perhaps destined for a profound, untouchable solitude.